Hi, and in response to a forum post about Legendaries, which I'll link in the description below, of course, for which there has been a blue reply, I thought I'd have another little discussion about Legendaries, where we are with them in Legion. It's not the first time I've talked about this, and it's not going to be the last either. So what I really want to do is to go over the post that sparks this on the US forums, as well as to sort of consider where Legendaries have come from, how they've evolved as the game's gone on, and sort of, rather than trying to look through in a really isolated prism, try to see why it is that Legendaries are as they are now, and also try to infer from what Blizzard said, if we can indeed, what their thinking might be in terms of changes for the future. When I say the future, I mean the following expansion. So what I'll do first of all is just to have a look at the post that's been posted first of all. So this person has said, I have thoroughly enjoyed most aspects of Legion. I consider myself a top tier raider. However, I'm not able to play at a high level because of the RNG on top of RNG legendary system. I've been benched in 2 guilds because of it and ended up taking a break for 3 weeks due to frustration. Many others, and myself included, have had the displeasure of receiving 3 utility legendaries in a row. This has to be the most terrible experience I've had in all the years I've played WoW, since early vanilla. Now, before I go on to their next paragraph, I will just point out, of course, I haven't looked up this person. It might well be this person isn't actually as good as they think they are. It might be, you know, that there's various other issues there. It doesn't really matter in a way, because it is very perception based anyway. This is very much about perception. Do people feel the legendary system is preventing them raiding at any sort of level? And what we have to bear in mind is what Blizzard said about the legendary system, because the criticisms that are coming here are exactly the same criticisms that everyone levelled at it, from very obviously top tier raiders all the way down. The main criticisms were coming through right from early alpha. As soon as it was announced how the system was going to be, there weren't many supporters at all, not at all. And what Blizzard said in response to it, their only real defense of the system was, it's not going to affect the world first race. Now, a couple of things there. First of all, although the world first race is of interest to a great many people, it only actually matters to a very small number. So most people are not actually all that bothered whether Legendary is affecting the world first race or not. They're only concerned with their own race. However, the other side of it is this: the only reason that it is not affecting the world first race is not because the system isn't as RNG as people are saying. It's because of 2 things. First of all, the very top raiders, the ones who are going to go for those world first, are playing this game so much that they actually end up with quite a lot of legendaries. Now, even some of those were bitten on the arse, because there's one thing about the philosophy of the new legendary system. There was another thing about implementation. There were a lot of aspects of the implementation that were actually just cocked up. One thing they did, for example, which they didn't admit until they removed the system, was put what you might call a soft cap on legendaries, which is the idea that as soon as you get a legendary, every time you do content that can award a legendary and you don't get a legendary, the chance of getting one the next time goes up. Increments, tiny amount, but it goes up a little bit. It's a sort of bad luck protection, so that if you're doing all this content, you don't go for like months at a time without getting a legendary. So if there is anyone who still hasn't got a legendary now and they've been playing since the start, it's almost certain that these people haven't actually been doing that much content. Certainly not the stuff that awards legendaries. So it was to stop that. But of course, the people in these world first guilds, yeah, they were going to go at it hammer and tongs. They were always going to get several legendaries. They were bit bitten on the arse with this soft cap, because if none of those 4 were any good, or at least if no 2 of them were any good, then that'd be problematic. But they also had multiple characters. Some of these people had like half a dozen characters. And although the top guilds haven't said a lot on the issue of legendaries, one thing that one guy did say was, all that happens was they used the character that had the best legendaries. So some of these guys might be rolling multiple outs, maybe of the same class, and the one they main is the one that just so happened to get the best legendaries. So that's the reason it didn't affect the world first race, because they're able to do things that us mere mortals, either can't or really don't want to. So the next thing this person says, they go into the second paragraph, Blizzard, I'd really like to stress this, I'll say it again, I can't begin to explain to you how terrible it feels to players who have received 3 non-DPS increased legendary in a row. How can this amount of in-game tragedy be allowed? It's disgusting. Okay, the English isn't all that great. You have created an incredible expansion. Don't you have any pride? Why hasn't anything been done about this? Please respond. Anything. Blah, blah, blah. So, as I say, I don't necessarily know this person's story. It's not really worth my effort going into detail and finding out, oh, actually, this person doesn't play very well at all. Because it actually doesn't matter. It actually does demonstrably affect a lot of people. Now, I'll give you a couple of types of example. There are people I know who have been dropped from, basically to the bench and then basically out of the guild because they have not got DPS legendaries. People who actually do perform well, who were performing very, very well in their guild in the early days of Emerald Nightmare before lots of people got legendaries. And it's, and you notice once you got to a point where people like Raiders had a few legendaries, there have been situations that I know personally, not just anecdotal, where some people have found that they've not had their raid spots anymore because they haven't had those legendaries. And as I say, these are not people who played badly because they were playing bloody well before everyone got their legendaries. And the other thing is this, there's a little example from my own guild a couple of weeks ago. We were very late on getting Mythic Hell yet, and that was our fault. We cocked that. We took too much time over Christmas, and we were not very focused when we got back as a guild. But just before Nighthold came out, on our last raid, we're going to kill Hellier now, we got a 0% wipe. It was 0.3%. Okay? And we didn't kill her, and we killed her the following week. So you can imagine that's a lot of lost ranks now. Okay, it's still our fault. We should have killed her earlier. We didn't. But just looking at it from a legendary point of view, very few people in the guild have the best legendaries. A decent number have a couple of reasonable legendaries, decent legendaries, but not necessarily the best ones. So only 2 or 3 people have what you'd call the 2 best legendaries for that fight, say. Now imagine this situation. Imagine that everyone had the best legendaries, that there was no RNG. It was like in MOP and WOD, where everyone sort of got the same one according to your level of progress in raids. If you did them every week, even at LFR, you would get them at a certain point. Then ask yourself, would that have been a 0.3% wipe? No, how could it have been? That would have been a kill. And then think to yourself how many times you've had close calls yourself, because this isn't just our guild. Thousands of guilds will have had a story similar to this, where, and it's not necessarily even a 0% wipe of the boss, it might be a phase, like a DPS check phase, that you kept almost making but not quite. And then you imagine, well, what if everyone had their best legendaries? So to say that the RNG hasn't affected guilds' progress would be untrue. Blizzard didn't say that. They said it wouldn't affect the world first race. And maybe it hasn't. But it sure as hell affects a lot of other people. Now, there was another post, before I get to Blizzard's post, that I want to go through as well. And you can sort of, it's a nonsense post. It's clear nonsense. But you can understand the feeling. So what this person said is, sad thing is you won't get a blue reply to this. Turns out they were wrong, they did. They even replied on the first page, so it didn't actually take them that long to reply. They will not admit the problems with the RNG system. I'm going to come back to that. And as I stated in the previous forum post, they either, okay, so this person's obviously talked about the issue before as well, either 1, don't know what they're doing, 2, intentionally wanted to create an award system that creates discord, regret, and disappointment. Now, we know that neither of those things are true. So the number 1, don't know what they're doing. They do know what they're doing. We might disagree. I mean, one thing I've been quite pleased about Blizzard is there's a lot of really good things about Legion, and people have been very positive. And I want to stress that. It's actually a really good expansion on balance. There have been a small number of things that are nonetheless impactful, but a small number of things that as soon as they were announced or as soon as they were released on Alpha, Legion Alpha, a lot of people were saying, look, there's going to be massive problems here, and these are what the problems are going to be. And Blizzard were, no. They were very bullish about it. And there have been a couple of things that they have changed, they've gone back on, and they've basically admitted that it was a fail, that they cocked it up. And that's actually quite big of them, and I applaud that. And I hope they would do the same thing in general. But to say they don't know what they're doing, I would say is not quite true. Sometimes they do things wrong and that are foreseeably wrong. But I think we have to distinguish between where they actually are incompetent about something, and which is much more likely, where we disagree with them on a point and it just turns out we were right. There is a distinction there. And then the second point, intentionally create an award system that creates discord, regret, and disappointment. Again, sometimes we joke about it. Sometimes Blizzard put things into the game that seem so silly and so divisive that we actually think it's almost like we joke about it as if they've got a competition. Who can piss off the community the most this week? And there's like, a free dinner at Denny's or something for the winner. But they obviously don't do that. They're not actually trying to piss us off. They're actually coming up with things that they think will please as many customers as possible. They're doing this for us. And so we know that that's not true. But at the same time, you can sort of see how your mind goes that way when they do things, that the whole community appears, at least the community that does communicate, appears to be at odds with. And Blizzard are very fond of talking about the fact that there's only so many people go on forums, and it's like less than a fifth of the whole population of the game actually do provide that feedback. But then I keep coming back to the argument, so how do you know what the other 80% want? Because Blizzard don't. They almost try and pretend they've got some secret way of knowing. They have no way of knowing. No way. I'm a player. I've never once received a survey about aspects of the game I like. In live, I used to, in like Wrath Beta, I remember, when I did content, it would come up with a survey asking how much you enjoyed it. I've not had that for a while, and we certainly haven't had anything like that in live. So it's all right saying we're only the 20%. They don't know what the 80% want. They ain't got a clue. They're guessing as much as we are. But what I'd like to do, before I come to Blizzard's post, I'd like to sort of think about how the situation has arisen in the first place. So, the way Legendaries started, Molten Core, there were a couple of Legendary you could get. One of them dropped off a mid-boss, but you needed two drop. Well, there's a couple of bosses. You needed two Legendary drops, so it could take quite a while to get them both. It took a while just to get one. And there's another Legendary that dropped off the last boss that still had some other thing to do. You didn't just get it. But, that was just one Legendary piece at least you needed. But it dropped off the last boss. Now, the situation about fearing for raid places didn't exist then, of course. 40-man raids, no one feared for their place. No one thought to themselves, well, I haven't got Thunder Fury, or I haven't got Sulphurous, therefore my raid place is in jeopardy. That was never an issue. It was, the lucky people who got these things. Yes, some people who could also have got it, I envy them, but your raid spot it didn't spoil your enjoyment of the game or anything like that. Then TBC, raid size dropped a bit, 25 as the main one. I mean, there were 20-man raids in vanilla, but you didn't get the legendaries from those, and there were 10-man raids in TBC, but you didn't get legendaries from those. But the 25-man, and it works in the same sort of way. It was this just random drop, and there weren't any till the end, really. I mean, Illidan was the main one, because although one dropped off killed Jaden, most skills didn't kill it, and even the ones that didn't kill it very far ahead of Wrath launch. So really the main legendary in there was the Twin Blades of Azeroth. Would you fear if you raid place in there? Potentially, but there was also another fear with that. There were situations where guilds were poaching players with those Twin Blades because they themselves were not getting very many. The guild I was in was getting so many, they were giving them away to warriors, tanking warriors, who were going, I don't want it. And they were being fought, it was like put in their bags. Well, we can't do anything with it. We can't disenchant it. Take the bloody thing. Just put it in your bag and don't use it. Because we're getting that many of them. I think we were one of the most in the world. I think we had like 9 full sets in that guild, or 8, something like that. We were certainly giving them to people who could use them but didn't want them, like tanks. It's ridiculous. But yeah, there were some guilds who were poaching there. So there were two sides to that. First of all, the guilds that were doing that, the people in their guild who weren't getting them, obviously their raid spot was in jeopardy because they were recruiting ahead of them. And the guilds whose players were going were losing those legendaries that they had got themselves. So that was the first time where you would say the legendary system was failing a bit, but it wasn't on a massive scale. It only affected so many guilds. It wasn't rife. Then you had Wrath, where they sort of went back to a model that actually had come in vanilla, because you had, it wasn't, only legendaries weren't just in Molten Core. You had one in Nax where it was much more a case of it would take you a long time to get it, and you had to do a lot of content that most guilds wouldn't do. But it was sort of predictable. You know, you gathered the bits and you did the quests. And so you'd get a situation where you would only give those to the most committed members of the guild anyway, and it would take a long time to get it. It wasn't just a lucky drop, although there was RNG on the splinters that you had to collect. And they sort of seem to use that model a bit in Wrath. Now, I didn't raid for most of Wrath, so I'm not really in tune with it, but I'm sort of familiar with the concept of it. And again, it was the same sort of thing. So you would give it to the guild members who seemed fairly committed. In other words, lower risk of them being poached. And it would take quite a while to get it. But it was also predictable. You weren't having a situation where one guild would get like 5 of them and another guild would get none, who both guilds doing the same type of content. Wouldn't really happen like that. There wasn't much variation in the rate at which you got them. But it was still only for several people. So some people, if you happen to play a class that could use it really well, those people would suddenly go sky high on the output meters, whether it was for the healing or the damage one. And others would be like, fucking hell, you know. So it wasn't great from that point of view either. Because you can't exactly you can't just tune those classes down going, well, they've got a legendary. Because very few people would have had the chance to get that legendary. You know, there was no LFR then. There was no way of getting it through that. Or even really flex in any serious sense. They were too difficult, but that was about it. So you had to be in a decent raid guild to even have a crack at it. Then came Cataclysm, where it was the same sort of model, really. And I think by the end of Cataclysm, they were sort of realising, you know, with the rogue and the mage ones, that it's not great excluding most players, because you were excluding most players. And I think they were, because especially with LFR coming out in late Cataclysm, they were moving into a sort of a mode of not wanting to be seen to exclude large numbers of players from any aspect of content. So LFR came in because you had people complaining that they're paying their subscription but not getting to see this content. You know, and a lot of people would argue against it, saying, well, just put in the time. You know, it's like any game, you put in the time, you get the rewards. But the argument prevailed that, you know, they're paying their money, they're going to access to content. LFR came out. And it's the same sort of mindset, I think, with Legendaries. They sort of realised with the Legendaries, there's all these people going, well, where's my Legendary? So then MOP came out and it was Legendaries for all. Now, there was good and a bad thing about that. The good thing is the RNG was removed. There's no situation where someone is feeling that they can't compete with other people just because that person gets a legendary or they play a class that can access that legendary. It's all on a much more even playing field. You got your legendary stuff if you kept up with the raiding thing, and you could even do it on a casual basis in LFR. You'd be a little bit behind because LFR was staggered in terms of its release as it is now, but you know, if you did that, you would get the same as everyone else. The downside was, again, it was seen as like legendary, welfare legendaries. And a lot of people were, you know, it's like it lost its special aspect of it. But I think, you know, to be fair to Blizzard, they are sort of caught. I mean, I think it probably would have been better if Legendaries had never existed, because they were sort of caught in a difficult situation. On the one hand, if you go back to the situation where they seem special, like very few people get them, you create the situation where some people like that's raid spot for life, basically, and other people, maybe through no fault of their own, are not able to compete. Whereas you give it to everyone and it doesn't seem special. So with Legion, what they've done is they've come up with this. They've come up with loads and loads of legendaries, and they've come up with this RNG system where it is now. They're sort of saying, well, if you do lots of content, you'll get the legendaries, but you've also got this RNG thing that is affecting people's ability to raid. And maybe even if it's not costing their raid spot, it's potentially costing their guild. Because again, remember those tight DPS checks or those tight healing checks, and how, you know, whereas you might make it if a few more people had the BIS legendaries compared to not. So Blizzard's response on this. So what they've said is there are a fair number of additions / tweaks in 7.2 to the legendary system. They've not been introduced on PTR yet, but they are coming, and this is something we'll be actively seeking feedback on. Some of the issues that you highlight are things we are hoping to ameliorate with these changes. So before I go into that, so the first thing here is, my immediate question was, are Blizzard admitting that there's been a problem that needs dealing with? that they're trying to sort of sticky tape over and they'll get better for next expansion? Or is this something that was always going to be planned anyway? Because I find it difficult to know. I might have been able to guess in previous years, because in previous years, you did stuff on an expansion's alpha or beta, mostly beta in my case. And that was stuff for launch. You were testing stuff that will come out at launch. Legion was very different. There were several things that appeared and that Blizzard talked about that it transpired later on were clearly never intended for launch. Like the Treasure Demon, for example, in Dalaran, to take a silly example. That was in early alpha, and then it was removed, and I thought, oh, maybe they've changed their mind about it. No, it wasn't. It was just intended for the Diablo anniversary. It was never intended to be a main feature of Legion. I didn't know that. And another thing they talked, coming back to Legendaries, is they talked about being able to target certain Legendaries. So it's like, you can, if there's particular Legendaries you really want, you'll be able to target that type of content where it's most likely to drop, so that you sort of do get to choose in a way without it being a real choice. There's still a little bit of RNG there, but you get to stack the odds in the favour of a particular Legendary. But that wasn't brought out at launch. And again, it could be one of those things, because they are talking about this again, that maybe they never intended it for it to be launched. They knew that as the expansion went on, they were going to introduce more Legendaries. So we started off with 8 per class stroke spec. Every sort of spec had 8, some of which were specific to that spec, some of which were common across several. Now we've got 10 in 7.1.5. And there's talk about others ones, including crafted Legendaries. And someone noted down, do you mean, in terms of being able to choose, do you mean the crafted Legendaries? And there's pros and cons to that as well. It depends how it works, I suppose. Actually, I'm not even sure it does depend how it works. It wouldn't be a very satisfactory solution to me. But this reply doesn't actually tell us whether Blizzard have just gone, do you know what? It's not worked. It hasn't worked. We need to try and do what we can now and then completely change it for the next expansion. Or are they actually happy with it? Do they not care about the raiders who've been screwed over by it, seeing them as a much smaller part of their customer base, and thinking that actually it has succeeded? We would always plan as more Legendaries came out to allow you to target a bit more as the expansion came out anyway. And that's what we're going to do next expansion. I don't know. So the next thing is, please have patience with us as we roll out new quest stroke feature content on PTR next week, and then into rolling out the item reward system changes. It's a bit of a staged progressive rollout to focus testing and feedback, but there are additional changes coming. Please continue to supply feedback throughout this process though. I mean, the thing there is, it's not going to help these people who are already screwed over by it, already disenchanted by it, and who continue to be, because they're not saying there's some sort of hotfix coming out. They're talking about something that's not even on the PTR for the patch that's not going to come out for several more months. So again, there's no real indicator of where they might go with this for the future. I think all we can really say is, at the moment, I personally just think that Legendaries, everything that was ever thought to be wrong with the Legendary system before it launched, has been demonstrated to be wrong. And I'm not talking about this from any personal salt. I've actually been lucky with Legendaries. I have got 2 of the BIS Legendaries for my class. I actually got my first Legendary. It took me quite a while to get it. I was one of the last in my raid group. But it's not like I was waiting months and months. We were still in the early stages of Emerald Nightmare Mythic Progress when I got it. And I got a decent one. It wasn't the BIS one. But there were only 2 damage ones for my spec anyway. Out of 8 Legendaries, only 2 of them were any good from a point of view of damage. But I got one of them. Can't complain. I got another one when 7.1.5 launched. So I now have 2 DPS Legendaries. I'm not complaining. I haven't done Mythic Plus thousands of times like some people have. I've done it very few times. But I've done plenty of raiding. I've done other content. But yeah, I've no personal complaint myself. But I do feel incredibly sorry for people who have this situation, especially perhaps in a guild, because some people might argue, well, Legendaries, especially after the nerf, it was really bad when Legion launched because some of these Legendaries were so powerful it was untrue. A lot of the most powerful ones have been nerfed a bit, so although they're a decent step up, they're maybe not as win or lose as they used to be. And you could argue if players were really good at their class, they'd probably be able to cope. And people will probably be able to point to examples of really good players who do really well in top guilds. Not the very top, but you know what I mean, top tier guilds. Good mythic paced guilds. Who keep their raid spots in spite of the fact they don't have good legendaries. But it's, you know, for every one of those you can point out, you are probably able to point out 10 people who, even if they were doing well, their guild just thought, well, we might as well take the people with the best legendaries. Because some people do that. Some people, when they're choosing the group that's going to go on progress, don't really think too much about their players. They look at it. They actually look at stuff. Oh, which specs are doing best on this fight? Oh, we'll take those. And they don't really think to themselves, oh, yeah, but that player's really shit and this one's really good. Or anything like that. A lot do, of course. Those are the ones that make good progress. But there's plenty of ones who don't. And we have to, and I think we have to accept this perception as being something that very real and actually impacts people's enjoyment of the game. Because, you know, if you're being dropped onto the bench when you're doing perfectly well, and how's that your fault? Just because you haven't got good legendaries. You might have the same number of legendaries as everyone else. They're just not good ones. So you've obviously been doing the same amount of content as the average people in your guild, because you've got the same number of legendaries. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Sorry for sort of rambling there. As I say, it's not going to be the last time I come onto Legendary System. It is of an expansion of some really good features that I'm really enjoying in very many ways. It is very much a blot on the landscape, I think. And I think only through consistent feedback like this, like the person who's posted this, are we actually going to get Blizzard to realise that perhaps they need to rethink it. Even though I understand, and I think it will help if we don't make posts that are sort of suggesting that Blizzard are being cavalier about what's good for us or anything like that. I think we have to understand their position. You know, just in summary, I'll just say, as I say, I think they're in a situation where they think to themselves, we're in a philosophy now as they can't exclude anyone from content. So they have to allow legendaries to be accessible no matter what level of a particular content you do. At the same time, we need to be clear to them that we do not enjoy the RNG aspect of one person having 2 BIS legendaries and someone else not having them, and they're both players of equal skill and everything else is the same, and one player's going to do a hell of a lot better. And people just don't find that fun. They don't. I don't find it fun, and I'm potentially a beneficiary of this because I have good legendaries. Not the absolute BIS, but pretty close. But anyway, hope you found it interesting. As always, if you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share. Until next time, I'll see you later.